Good afternoon, everyone. There seems to be some kind of Microsoft Teams update happening or something. So normally this link allows for myself and our guests to be on sort of the presenter side of Teams. We have a lot of people that have signed in on this side and a lot of people on the live presentation side. If you are in here with us as presenters, please keep yourself muted and your videos off. We're not sure why that's happening, but it is happening, and if you're external, hopefully it's going okay for you. I've heard a lot of Microsoft Teams issues today, so I apologize if anybody's having some problems. But anyway, welcome back to our Michigan Department of Labor and Economic Opportunity webinar series, focusing in on workplace mental health. As you all know, there's a Q&A box at the top of your screen. You can submit questions to at any time throughout today's presentation, and we'll get to as many as we can at the end. And if you haven't already, please make sure you sign up for emails on our michigan.gov/workplace mental health page. This site includes all the recordings. It'll include this recording after the fact of all the webinars that we've done. We also have our workplace mental health report, the Surgeon General report, and links to other useful information and resources on that page. And as you know, our goal is to provide working people and employers with information about issues impacting our workplaces, the impacts to our mental health, and options for addressing these issues. And looking at the work that we've been doing, we've really identified what we call 3 pillars. These would be things that are happening in the workplace, things that are affecting the workplace, and individual behavioral health support. So as we try to do these webinars, we want to make sure that we hit on as many of those pillars as we can through the various content that we'll do. And today kind of touches on a couple of those, frankly. So in our outreach, I know I talk a lot about systems and structures with the focus on chronic stress and the impacts of chronic stress. And while we believe that dealing with individual issues is important, it's becoming more and more clear to us that we have to keep a focus on the systems and the system level of how we work, where we work, and things that happen either in work or come into work. So it seems like we can draw pretty clear links between structural issues and poor health outcomes, which of course includes our mental health. Chronic stress and trauma also find their way into the workplace, and ensuring we are aware of, supporting, and managing this is critical to keeping people in the workplace and healthy. So with us today, we have a great expert, Marty Bledsoe, who's going to help us explore this topic with a discussion today about how our children's mental health can impact us, including our workplaces. And she's an expert in the area and has quite literally written the book on the topic. So Marty, thank you for joining us today, and I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Sean, and hello, everyone. It's great to be here with you today. I think your 3 pillars are spot on as we think about what's happening in the workplace, what affects us as we go to work, and also the individual behavioral health needs that an employee or their family dependents might have. And this study that I'm going to share an excerpt with you all today really tried to look at how the family mental health, specifically the children's mental health, was impacting working parents' ability to be present at work. And we feel like that's important for a number of reasons. One is that obviously we want to encourage every employee to be able to bring their best to their working life, whether that's their highest creativity or their most resilience, right? But also because work is often a place where we get resources. It's a place where we are able to access care benefits. It's a place where we are able to access perhaps, discount programs or other opportunities that might come in helpful if we're struggling with something in our family. The data that I'm going to show you today was collected throughout 2021 and 2022 by an organization called the Kids Mental Health Foundation. And what we did as part of this project, we interviewed over 3 different waves of research, more than 8,000 working parents across the United States. And we were balancing for geography, socioeconomic status, work situation, so part-time, full-time contract. We were also balancing for same-sex and heterosexual couples. We were balancing for race. And then we were also balancing for level of child mental health distress. So we didn't want to just talk to the parents who said, yes, we have a problem going on. And we didn't just want to talk to the parents who said, everything's fine. And the important thing that I want to point out is that we were able to talk to them qualitatively. Some small groups came together for conversation, and then in survey work we were able to get more than 8,000 points of data to shape the results of what you are about to see. And as I said, this is an excerpt, but happy to take questions as we get to the end of this. And what we saw really started with the storyline, of course, of the pandemic accelerating the rise of mental health in workforce strategy as a general concept. And that we can tell as younger and younger employees take their spot in the workforce, they think about mental health as part of their employment decisions. So you can even just see from 2019, half of millennials and 3/4 of Gen Z said they had left roles in the past for mental health reasons. So partly you see workforce strategy adapting to that need. We also see that mental health support programs and benefits are important to employees in that younger age cohort when they're thinking about or considering applying for a job. And then finally, to finish setting the stage, we see that 2 in 3 employers said a mental health crisis in the US would come by 2023. As we all round into 2024 here of Q2, we know that that is still very much at play. But 9 out of 10 said that their organization was not ready to handle that crisis. And some of you may frankly be feeling some of that even yet now, thinking about what were you prepared to handle and how could you have possibly predicted or helped. We ask the parents in our work to help understand, how much do you have access to resources specific to your child's mental health? And only 33% said they could access something for their child if they needed it. And that could have, but we were very general here, that could have been a benefit, it could have been a discount program, it could have been access. But here's where we really started to see some incredible data that half of working parents had missed work at least once per month because of an issue related to their child's mental health. And I'll pause here because I didn't do it at the beginning and say, we allowed in our work for this to include something like a behavioral health call from the school, a need to intervene in terms of maybe a learning issue, to a mood disorder like anxiety or depression, including things like doctor's appointments, screenings, things like that. So we really took a broad definition here because that's what mental health is all about, is the holistic approach to how someone is mentally healthy. And not only was it interrupting work or making parents miss work, but it was also interrupting their brain share at work. So they told us, 3/4 of them told us that they had been unprepared in a meeting or fallen behind or felt like their work quality was negatively affected. Now, this is not to paint parents in a negative light. This is to show the fact that the problem is something that crosses over into their ability to show up, like I said, as their best self. Now, when it comes to Mindshare, we did ask parents, how much time do you think you're spending with your brain sort of on that back burner, thinking about an issue going on for your kiddo? And what we saw is that it was anywhere from 30 to 50% of their thoughts. And I'm pausing there for a minute, because if you've had any kind of behavioral health or emotional health or mental health concern for a child in your life, you know the intensity of that, and imagine 30 to 50% of someone's mind share really going into, that effort. We noticed too that the concern was very high. Now remember, this particular data point is late 2021, but parents were telling us extremely concerned about their child's emotional health, development, or behavior in the past 2 years, which was inclusive of our phases of lockdown. And a lot of it had developed during that time. So maybe a child who was developing more neurotypically or typically would have started to demonstrate some things that are causing concern to the parent. And the other thing is, and this is really important, is that 2/3 of the parents in our study said dealing with any issue related to their child's mental health was challenging for them. And in a subsequent layer of the survey findings, we were able to ask how many of you grew up with a solid mental health vocabulary in your family of origin? How many of you grew up being taught or talked to about mental health and stress and resilience, and how to know when you have sort of had your fill of stress and you're crossing over into a more concerning stage, or how to know if a cognitive issue like ADHD or dyslexia is contributing to a higher level of stress at school? Most of us didn't grow up like that, myself included. In fact, we talk about the difference between stop your crying or I'll give you something to cry about versus I can see you're really upset. Can you try to use your words and tell me what's bothering you? You know, we've made a real shift in parenting styles over the last 2 generations to try to give our kids some tools for mental health, but we don't have them in our toolbox necessarily. So 2/3 of the parents are saying, yeah, it's a challenge if I have to step into this. Again, reflecting on some of the lockdown days, we found that it was almost neck and neck how interruptive remote schooling had been and child's mental health issues had been. And if you had a child in that scenario or your teams had children at home in those scenarios, you probably witnessed some of this. You know, trying to conduct school on an iPad for a young child can lead right into a behavioral health incident, which if repeated can lead into a behavioral health concern. The other thing is that we were curious about an employer offered solution. So I've heard a lot of employers, especially since 2021, trying to grapple with how much of our workforce's mental health is really in our purview, how much of it is in our control, how much can we really help with it. What we heard is that parents really felt like they'd be really interested in learning more about children's mental health. So a learning and development solution, a course offered through their workplace, because if you think about it, this is a setting where they can possibly be somewhat disconnected from the issue, from the family, from the home potentially, and just focusing in and learning something again that they didn't grow up understanding on their own. We offered them a few choices about, you know, well, what would that do for you exactly? And this was really important. What we heard is that not only would the nuts and bolts of the course be helpful, again, giving some basic mental health literacy, some simple vocabulary, some really basic techniques of how to manage stress and how to talk to kids about tough topics, but also parents said, this would make me feel so valued in the workplace. It would help contribute to a feeling of good company culture, increased satisfaction, increased desired feeling that this is a desired place to work, increased productivity, and even reduce turnover. And in some ways, I think that has to do with the symbolism of certain offerings when it comes to the benefits and training space. I think there are often some halo effects that happen when an employer is willing to step up and say this particular population or this particular problem is important enough to us to include in our standard policies and benefits. The other thing is, you know, employee wellness is a huge topic, and it encompasses not just mental health, it encompasses social health and financial health and even physical and community health, right? But when we asked about wellness programs, what would you be most likely to use? What would you really desire? Not surprisingly, employees rated their children's mental health course and training above even training for their own mental health. And again, for the parents on the call, that might not be so surprising. Although I will caution, we strongly suggest and have since then and continue to suggest that you shouldn't put your own mental health on the back burner for your child's mental health too far. But then even their own physical health, they were not interested as much in a resource around that. They really wanted to dial into what the what the employer could offer them to help with some of the things that they were encountering at home. Now, from here, the slides do go into more of a direct understanding of curriculum and resources, and I won't get into any of that today. I do want to add quickly before we open it up to more conversational and topics and questions, that in our follow-up surveys, we found more and more parents saying that they had changed jobs, they had pulled back or switched to a part-time or a more flexible option because of their child's mental health. So in the 2022 survey, which we named the ripple effect, because we genuinely saw some of that great resignation trend being quite relatable back to a child mental health need. And it was about 30% of parents who said they'd made some sort of change. Now, the other thing we asked is, do you think you would benefit from having another adult to talk to about this problem? And overwhelmingly, parents said yes. I think there's a really strong peer support angle in parenting and family raising in general. But then we started asking them to break that down. Now, who would you most be likely to talk to? And we saw, physicians and clergy and friends and even family members coming up as trustworthy sources. But when we got into manager and human resources contacts, those were the lowest on the list. And so what that tells us is that people are making decisions about their jobs based on what they think is best for their child and their mental and behavioral development. And they're probably not talking openly about that in the workforce. So it is fair to say that there is a culture by culture tendency. Of course, every team is different, but there is a culture by culture tendency for people to hold a lot of that very close and private. And so even in a well-meaning exit interview or engagement survey, you may not be getting the kind of answer from your parent or caregiver employees that would clearly say to you, oh, well, we see what this is. This is not about, the particulars of our arrangement. This is about something external. And you very frankly may not know that. And so what we have suggested then is that employers can do a couple of things. They can invest in actual resources that train working parents and frankly grandparents too, right? Or adoptive parents or even extended family members about this new world of raising kids in this mental health aware society and time. But also think about the leaders in your company, especially your managers. Are they encouraged or incented or even permitted to talk openly about their own concerns or challenges and the things that they have dealt with and faced and how they have solved it? And that alone can do a lot to reduce that feeling of an employee having to hold a lot of privacy around these topics. Because again, back to what I said at the beginning, with the workplace being a place where people access resources and they get benefits and they get even just simply, referrals or discounts, this is an incredible opportunity to connect everything that a powerful employer can bring to an important problem with what an employee needs. But it's probably not going to be because the employees are waving their hands. It's going to have to be something that the employer bravely steps into to acknowledge that we do care about mental health at work, and we recognize it may not all just be about work. It may be about what you're living with and dealing with before you walk in the doors or even jump on the Teams call with your colleagues.
Absolutely. Marty, you kind of opened with controlling for some variables in the study and the research.
Yeah.
I was raised in a single mother household, and I know that because of that, we did not, I'm quite young, but let me just say it was at a time where we didn't really talk about that stuff or pay attention to mental health the way that we do more broadly now. And I know that I had behavioral issues, and I remember calling my mom all the time. I know for a fact that she lost a couple of jobs because she had to take care of me and my sister in different ways. And do you see that? I don't know if it was in the research that you referenced, but do you see a big difference or bigger challenge for single parents? I would assume, yeah, right?
There were some differences there. We also were expecting a very big gender difference between moms' jobs taking a much bigger hit or making a lot more adjustments than dad's jobs. And what we saw is that it was actually pretty similar mom to dad. It was more hard for families where there was just one parent. And often what we would hear from them is, this is where I had to, find a different company or ask to be moved to a different team because there's no one else to call. I mean, I have to be there if the school calls, which is a typical occurrence here. Yeah, great question.
Yeah, it makes it quite difficult. So I'm curious, I don't know if this is in your research or not, but we talk a lot in our department already about how much of a challenge childcare is to find and deal with and the stress of it all. What do you see from parents or responses on the availability of mental health resources for kids? I know I talk with coworkers and it's, you got months long waits and it's really challenging. Like that's adding a lot to it, I would assume, right, Marty?
It's adding a lot to it. I think there are a couple of things that we heard. First of all, you mentioned the Surgeon General's report, and we had the opportunity in 2022 for the Surgeon General to actually join us for a roundtable to go over this data with some of the stakeholders. And what we overwhelmingly heard from the clinical side is there will never be enough therapists to get every child a routine 16-week course of psychotherapy that we typically use to address a behavioral concern. But if we can that's a drastic word, but if we can empower, I would say, parents, teachers, guidance counselors, and even youth sports coaches with some basic vocabulary and understanding where we can help them spot issues, we can help them understand how to be a mental health supportive approach to things like grades and competitive performance and those kinds of things, we think that there's a real opportunity to reduce the need for that acute intervention with that 16-week course of psychotherapy, and maybe get to a more maintenance kind of rhythm with our kiddos, where we can understand what they're going through, we can better communicate with them and let them communicate with us. And that is one thing that the clinical experts, of which I am not, I am one of the researchers, but not the clinicians, but the clinicians will tell you over and over and over, kids communicate through their behavior. So when you mention behavior problems, as you said, that typically is a kid is trying to signal something doesn't jive with me right now, doesn't feel right. So and that's hard. It's really hard, as you know, in the workplace, right? It's hard to deal with a client or a partner or a teammate who isn't really telling you what's going on, but it's kind of sending you some signals that things are difficult. I mean, that is exhausting, right? And so with little ones who can't do anything else, it really becomes a guessing game for a lot of parents. And so one thing I will say is that the Kids Mental Health Foundation, where this research came from, has a wonderful, wonderful set of resources online where you can start to learn some of this stuff, even if you didn't grow up with it, even if you're skeptical of it, because you can start to get a real sense of, how do I talk to kids about current events, or how do I help my child deal with racism or microaggression? Those kinds of topics are on there, and I think that's helpful to almost any audience.
Yeah, I love it because, and I love the idea of sort of in workplace training for kids' mental health and how their minds function, because I think all of us are guilty, I know I am, of, raising our little humans, as one of my colleagues calls them, and 80% of the time they are like mini versions of adults, and we start to project on them that they're at the same developmental stage as the rest of us, and they're not. I mean, I think all of our trivia, right? We all know our frontal lobe's not fully developed until we're 25 or 26 years old. So we're getting better about that, but you can lose sight of that quite often. So I do like the idea of how to be better equipped to help your kids when they're still really, depending on their age, there's a lot of development to go yet. So I really, really like that. So you wrote a book for modern moms.
Yes.
What are there a few tidbits that you always go to? Like, what are a few things or tips that you give people from your writing and your experience?
One of the things I like to talk about is that this is not just an altruistic endeavor. If you've experienced a child who's going through a behavioral challenge, and this is inclusive of things like giftedness, which we might not always understand is part of this, or twice exceptional kids who maybe have a learning disability and a mood disorder, which I always say, if you had a learning challenge and the world was organized to come at you in a way that makes no sense to your brain, but you don't understand enough to even say that yet, you'd probably be anxious or depressed too, right? I mean, how in the world can you understand that at a young age? So those things tend to coexist. And then you get a kid who possibly can be very dysregulated or struggle with transitions. And that is where I'm talking like this is concrete, nuts and bolts, will impact your daily life over and over and over. It is not just because this is a warm and fuzzy topic. Like, you try to get out the door with a kid who doesn't understand how to do 4 things at once from a verbal instruction and can't tell you that, and proceeds to try to get your attention by like sitting down on the floor instead of going to school. And you'll find out real fast that this is really about streamlining your own life and making your own, not only your own interactions smoother, but more positive. Nobody likes to start the workday feeling like, well, I had to scream at my child to get, out the door, or I had to leave them sobbing at daycare. One of the things that I do talk about in the book, and I call this a pro tip, is to really to zero in on your particular child and their love language. If you're not familiar with that concept, it's this notion that we kind of communicate love in one of 5 ways. It might be gifts or time or touch or words of affirmation or acts of service. And the reason I say that is that can really go a long way toward refilling the bucket with a kiddo who's struggling. And it might make the difference between dropping off a child with a little token every morning because they're into gifting and they're into touching something that you've given them, and that helps them separate, versus a child who needs a secret handshake with you to walk off with confidence, right? And so it's honestly about, I think, getting to know your individual kiddo and what works, and using those concepts that only an adult frontal lobe can understand, to connect with them in a way that makes it easier for you and for them.
I blame all of my early life stuff on the lack of a fully developed frontal lobe, just so you know. But so then somebody asked real quick, could you repeat the name of the resources you just mentioned? As you just took a joke.
That's okay. The group that ran this study is called the Kids Mental Health Foundation, and their signature program is called On Our Sleeves. That's why you see the child with the emotional icons there on his skin. And they are affiliated with Nationwide Children's Hospital in Columbus, Ohio. And they are drawing on clinical teams there, but they also are affiliated with other children's hospitals around the country. And they are engaged right now in a pretty massive awareness building campaign about the fact that we have to, as a whole entire society, take this problem very seriously. One of the things that most startled me, I think, when I heard it on a panel, and it wasn't even my comment, was if you're raising kids, you know how fast 20 years can go. I mean, it is really a blink, right? Well, factor in that means 20 years from now, these kids are applying for jobs. They're interning for you. They are trying to contribute. And if we don't, as a whole, get it right now, that's going to be really challenging for all of us. So it's an important investment, whether you have kids or not, whether you understand all this or not. And in fact, I guarantee the parents on your teams are dealing with it at home, whether they're letting you know that or not.
Just as a joke, I always told my wife there's a mom clock and a dad clock, because 20 years raising kids to me felt like a very long time. So I'm just joking. So one of the other things you do is you consult employers, right, on kind of how to better manage these types of situations. And maybe you could just kind of run us through a few of the hurdles you run into, and then kind of, if you're going to do nothing else, do this. If you're going to do two things, do that. Like, are there a couple of things that are your go-tos for different employers?
I think that if you're going to do nothing else, do this tip would honestly be to put caregiver status on either your engagement survey data, which you may not have ever done, on your exit survey data, or even on your holistic employee wellness data that you're collecting, or portraits that you're painting of who your workforce really is. And the reason I say that is there's a lot of innovation going on in this space. The HR benefit space is changing and developing at light speed. But how do you know what is the right new thing to try? I mean, are you going to really take a tried and trusted benefit like EAP and put those dollars towards something completely new? Well, I wouldn't do that until you know how many people are caregiving. And this is specific to children, but I do know there's a national effort underway to get us a database that shows children and elder care data together. So childcare and elder care data together, which would be very helpful. So understanding that, and then thinking about, okay, so if I have a whole cadre of young employees with young children, maybe I do need to think about a childcare backup plan. But if I have a bunch of employees whose parents are retiring and they don't know what to do, then maybe I need to go down the path of some of these concierge services that help people sort through what are aging options in their communities. I mean, it really can depend. And that's a matter of getting to know your employees more than skin deep. And I think that people are more and more open to that than ever before. You may not get 100% answers, but at least you'll be starting to take that seriously to find out.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I think one of the things we talk about a lot in our outreach is sort of making sure you have some degree of flexibility. And just for anybody that's watching that's in a leadership role, just try to understand that typically the higher you rise in an organization, the more control you're going to have. So not every other worker in the workplace's life is quite like yours. And you want to be mindful of that. I'm thinking about that, as I shared with my own mother, having a little more flexibility, recognizing that these are big obligations. And as I always talk about, the stress, but you don't have two stress buckets, right? It's all in the same stress bucket, and it's all going to carry back and forth. So if you want to keep people, I think you would say that, right? If you want to keep people, you want to recruit people, if you want to develop people and have healthier workers, this is something you have to be mindful of. So it looks like we're about out of questions, Marty, for the day, and we're right at our time. So this worked out just right on the money. And I just want to thank you so much for joining us today and sharing this wonderful information, as well as resource to the Kids Mental Health Foundation. How should we find more from you?
Well, you can find more at apparently.com, and it's a-parently. And also I continue to, I have a Facebook page and a LinkedIn page as well for Apparently, so you can find more information there. And I am on LinkedIn. Feel free to follow me there. I do post a lot of articles and opinions, so appreciate that too.
Well, thank you, Marty. Thanks everybody for joining us today. This is Mental Health Awareness Month. If you're not on our email list, you may not know, but we have webinars scheduled each week for the rest of the month covering different issues. This is a great one to start off with, to really focus in on all of the stress and challenges that being a parent can create and how that carries with you. So thank you all so much for joining us today, and we'll see you next week.